If I was going to simplify on the question of crisis, and an occasion like this, simplifications are really called for. One of the things I think Marx does is to say what the contradictions of capital lead to is at certain moments in capital's history, you end up with a rationale for individual behavior which produces the following collective result, in which surplus capital and surplus labor exist side by side, and there seems to be absolutely no way to put them together to do useful things, so that you have these surpluses of capital and labor and a very situation where society is crying out for all kinds of things that need to be done, and capital can't do it because the purpose of a capitalist is to make a profit, not to help society in any way. So you get this crisis formation, and Marx then kind of says, well, it's interesting about bourgeois economics. It's fine when everything's going fine, but in a crisis, he says, all the bourgeois economists can do is to say, this would not happen if only capitalism would perform the way I depict it in my textbook. It's a wonderful kind of thing to kind of say, And the example of that I always go back to is when Her Majesty the Queen, late departed Majesty the Queen, was actually together with the economists of the British Academy, and she asked them about the crisis of 2007, 2008, and said, how come you guys didn't see this coming? And there they are over tea in Buckingham Palace, and the economists didn't know what to say, so they decided they would write a report. And they went away and they wrote a report, and then they came back to her and sent it to her and said, we were really working very hard at trying to get everything together, but we missed something, and we collectively missed systemic risk. And you kind of go, what? Now, if you're an engineer and you're in charge of making an aircraft and you didn't take care of a systemic risk, you wouldn't last in your job very long. And the fact that the whole economics profession, and in effect, what they were saying was, we didn't understand there was something at the center of all of this called contradictions of capital. Conventional economists hate contradictions. They hate dialectics. They hate any of this stuff. I mean, it's really amazing just to listen to them. But then when it comes up to something like 2007, 2008, they had no idea it was coming. They had no idea what the problem was. And they don't know, to this day, they don't know. They have a standard solution, which is a very negative solution in the long run, which is in the middle of a crisis, what you do is you create as much money as you possibly can, and you just chuck it into the banks or chuck it in somewhere. You rescue the banks and make sure the banks are okay, and then you let the people suffer from all kinds of, either from inflation or deflation or something or other. So what you have is a world in which the economists won't read Marx. They don't know how to read Marx because as soon as you get into Marx, you suddenly find, well, there are these things which are contradictions, and oh my God, we can't stand the contradictions. We want a rationality that excludes all contradictions, and so we get this terrifying situation where the planners who actually take this stuff from the economists seriously and work with it, and they end up making the situation much, much worse.
I would like to tell a story that you stimulated me, David, listening to you. Actually, two little stories. One is about risk. When I went to university, they explained to me that the reason why an entrepreneur, a capitalist, gets a reward is because he has taken a risk. And I say he consciously, because when I was going to school, it was not conceivable by my professors that the capitalist might be a she. There has been some progress, not a lot, but some along that line. But there was none when I was going to school. So the capitalist gets a reward, profit, because he has risked his capital. He's made an investment, may not work out, so he's risking it. And I remember my first thought as a young man in school. Wait a minute, I said, just in all naivete. What about the worker who moved from another community here to take a job, who undertook a mortgage for a house on the premise of a job, whose wife and he or husband and she decided to build a family and have children on the premise of a job? They all took enormous risks, arguably much greater than what that capitalist who took a small part of his portfolio and threw it at a project. So they don't get paid for risk. They only get paid for the labor they do. And if the investor works for the company, he will get a wage or a salary. So the risk is not profit isn't a reward to risk. It's an excuse, because if you really wanted to reward risk, you would have to have a risk reward for all of the people who took risks to come together and make this work. And when I asked my professors, they looked at me with that hangdog look of, could you please ask me a different question? This is uncomfortable. And it's because they had never thought about it, not for 1 minute. Here's a second story. Technology. A machine comes across, available, invented somewhere, that makes workers twice as productive. Let's say they're making hats. So now each worker, instead of being able to make 10 hats a week, is able to make 20 hats a week. That's what it means. What does the capitalist do? We all know what the capitalist does. He fires half his workers, thereby buys the machine, now produces exactly the same number of hats before, half the workers, but each one is twice as productive, sells them, same price. Let's make it a very simple example. He takes the money, but now his profit goes up because half of his workers don't have to get a wage. He fired them. So he keeps as his extra profit what he doesn't pay to the workers that he fired. This is what we all see, and explains, for example, why workers have a long history of being very skeptical about technical change or progress.
Yeah.
But the truth of it is, there was, of course, an option. And the option is excluded unless you do Marxism. Here's the option, in case it hadn't occurred to you. I don't want to embarrass anyone. All the workers could be told, congratulations, we have a new machine. You now work 4 hours a day, not 8. In other words, we solve the problem by giving the workers the same wages they got before for half a day's work, same output, same number of hats, same revenue, same profit for the employer. I haven't lost anything. But the benefit of the technology has been in creating leisure, in giving the workers a transformation of their lives. Half time, same salary, a worker's dream. The workers are many. Their dream is denied. The capitalists are few. Their profitability is guaranteed. That's how we use technology. But that's not because it's in the technology. That's in the capitalist system that rigidly prevents one kind of usage and insists on the other, and then allows that to be replicated over the centuries. That's something Marx had fun with teaching us about.
By the way, on the question of risk, I think it's important to remember that most capitalists don't actually work with their own money. They borrow.
That's right.
And they borrow because that allows them to make a lot of profit by leveraging, which is using that distinction between the market rate of the interest and what they actually get back. So they can. So when Elon Musk, who's a very good example of exactly what you're talking about right now, when Elon Musk puts up $40 billion to buy Twitter, he didn't use his own money. He went to the banks. And he borrowed all the money because then they are actually the ones who end up having to take the final risk. And as we know from the 1970s onwards, we had this thing called moral hazard, in which speculative investments by the banks were always guaranteed by the state, so that the banks could go out there and do all this kind. So they could take on as much risk as they wanted. They could do all sorts of stupid investments and speculative investments. And if they went bust, as they did in 2007, 2008, then mummy daddy state comes along and kind of picks them up and says, okay, we'll help it. Meanwhile, the population is left sort of with no houses and things like that in 2007, 2008. So again, one of the things there is that who bears the risk? Now, one of the consequences of leverage is, of course, the debt economy has grown enormously over the years. And the IMF put out a report a couple of years ago in which they totaled up all the debts in the world, private debts, public debts, corporate debts. And it came to the fact that everybody in the world, per capita in the world, the level of debt indebtedness is now something like $86,000. Now that has grown from almost nothing in 1970 to $86,000 per person, per head of the whole global economy right now. And this is an insane world, when I write about the madness of economic reason, this is mad. But you can see that leveraging is very, very attractive, so that you always want to do things on other people's money, and you borrow other people's money. And that's, of course, where a lot of systemic risk comes in through this, what they call gently in terms, moral hazard. And this moral hazard is a peculiar term, but moral hazard is simply that banks can speculate on anything they like, big capital, and the bigger you are, the more easily you can borrow. So I couldn't borrow the sort of $40 billion to buy Twitter or anything like that, or borrow $20 billion as George Soros did when he bet against the pound and did all those kinds of speculative things. So that what we find is a capital which is leveraged right now, and the indebtedness in the world and the levels of indebtedness are becoming a real serious problem, and a debt is a claim on future labor. And when we start to look at the whole population, student debt and things like that, that's in a sense their future labor has been already sort of accounted for through the indebtedness. So that the cultivation of indebtedness, which has gone on over the last 30 or 40 years, is something which again is something very specific, with no surprise whatsoever that most of the crises that have occurred over the last 30, 40 years have increasingly been financially based. They're based in this crazy leveraging stuff. But again, that's the only way in which you can handle the surplus. And the surplus now is such that it's huge. And how do you dispose of that surplus? And the huge amount that's being wasted in Ukraine is minuscule, actually, with respect to the total surplus which is available throughout capitalist society. And we're in that situation where there's massive amounts of unused capital power, which is not being used for good social purposes at all. And the reason for that is it is not profitable. That the center of what a capitalist system is about is profitability, not social well-being. And I think you and I thoroughly agree that yes, the big task of socialism is about turning this whole economic system around, rejigging it and reconstructing it in a way that it meets social wants and social needs, with a great deal of freedom. I mean, your point about workers going 4 days a week, Marx has a nice idea, and he kind of says one of the measures of a good socialist society is one in which people have a lot of free time. They can do exactly what they want. And if you ask people right now, do you have a lot of free time? Everybody will tell you, no, I have no free time at all. Actually, capital eats up free time, even when it has nothing to do. So what we're living in is a society where, I would love to have kind of just free time. And, the day will come when we will take care of basic needs by working for 1 day a week, and the rest of the time we do as we damn well please. I mean, this is, just what a good socialist society might begin to look like.